latest headlines of the century. Dateline, Russia, November 7th, 1917. In a moment, the story.
Russia, one of the largest countries in the world. In the late 1800s, it was industrially falling behind. Their people started to dislike the current Tsar Nicholas II. This hatred and mistreatment of the working class in Russia is what led into the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution was caused by the citizens of Russia's rights being violated and stripped away from them. The Russian Revolution was something the people were in the right for wanting. However, the new leader was just as corrupt as the last one, leading to more rights being ignored, which subsequently led to events in the future which were seen as right by the Russian people. For example, the eventual Cold War that would happen. People of Russia united under communism since their Tsar had terrorized the people and left a massive slash in Russia, hurting their people and their economy. The revolution was a complex set of history. For our case, we'll be covering the revolution of 1917 and 1905. Also, some of the Russian Civil War. But before that, there are some important takeaways we need to go over. 1. The Bolsheviks were not the only socialist/communist group. They were just the more popular one at the time. 2. Russian Revolution was about the complete failure of the Tsarist system and the House of Romanovs. 3. Lenin started the Russian Civil War by calling for the overthrowing of the provisional government. 4. The Whites were a collection of monarchists, Democrats, Republicans, and even proto-fascism. 5. The Whites were also heavily disorganized through the Civil War due to the massive split between the interests of the soldiers and leaders. To start, the Bolsheviks gained popularity through the failure of the House of Romanovs during the Great War. Then the provisional government was caused by the Tsar Nicholas and his family fleeing the government to avoid taking responsibility for their failures in war and peacetime. Then Germany sent Lenin to start a revolution in Russia during World War I to peace out with the Russians and focus on France. During this, most nations, Western and Eastern, supported the Whites because of dislike towards socialism, and the White Army began to falter after the execution of the Tsar Nicholas family. The Brest-Litovsk Treaty was negotiated in modern-day Brest-Belarus, and was the peace treaty between Germany and the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks merged with the other socialist groups to form the USSR. After the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, defeated the Whites in 1922. Following the Russian Revolution, Lenin died, and that caused Stalin taking charge, who killed over 40 million people, including 27 million wartime deaths during World War II, and led to the Cold War, which almost led to nuclear Armageddon on numerous occasions. This also inspired other communist nations, like North Korea and Communist China, which led way to other dictators, like Mao and Pol Pot, who are considered to be even more evil than Stalin himself, which led to the split of many countries and caused many communist nations to be significantly less wealthy and developed.
Women played a significant role in the Russian Revolution, both as participants and symbols of change. The February Revolution, in particular, was sparked by women textile workers protesting against food shortages and poor working conditions. Many women also joined revolutionary organizations and the Red Army, contributing to the struggle for a new society. Alexandra Kollontai, a prominent Bolshevik and the first female member of Lenin's cabinet, championed women's rights and pushed for social reforms, including maternity leave and access to education. Despite these efforts, the revolution's promise of gender equality were not fully realized, and women continued to face systematic discrimination in the Soviet Union. The Russian Revolution also sparked significant cultural and artistic changes. During the early years of Soviet rule, artists and intellectuals embraced the revolution's ideals, producing works that reflected themes of social justice and equality. Innovative movements like constructivism and futurism thrived, as artists sought to redefine the relationship between art and society. Literature, theater, and cinema also underwent transformations, with figures like Sergei Einstein and Vladimir Mayakovsky using their work to propagate revolutionary ideals. However, this period of cultural experimentation was eventually stopped under Stalin, as socialist realism became the dominant artistic style, emphasizing conformity and state-approved narratives. While the Russian Revolution promised liberation and progress, it came at a tremendous human cost. Millions of lives were lost during the Civil War, famine, and political purges. Families were torn apart, and communities were uprooted as the new regime sought to consolidate power. The revolution's emphasis on collective good came at the expense of individual freedoms, leading to a society where fear and repression became commonplace. This human toll serves as a sobering reminder of the complexities and contradictions inherent in revolutionary movements. Economically, the Russian Revolution had far-reaching consequences. The transition from a feudal and semi-capitalist economy to a state-controlled socialist system was fraught with challenges. The war communism policies implemented during the Civil War, which included grain redistribution and a nationalization of industries, led to widespread famine and economic collapse. The new economic policy, NEP, introduced by Lenin in 1921, temporarily reintroduced elements of capitalism to stabilize the economy. However, this policy was short-lived, as Stalin's rise to power marked a return to centralized planning and forced industrialization. While these measures transformed the Soviet Union into a major industrial power, they came at the cost of immense human suffering. One of the defining characteristics of the Russian Revolution was the use of ideology and propaganda to galvanize support and maintain control. The Bolsheviks promoted the idea of Karl Marx, following on themes of class struggle and overthrow of capitalist systems. These ideas were dispersed through newspapers like Pravda, posters, and speeches delivered by charismatic leaders such as Lenin and Trotsky. The promise of a society where workers would control the means of production struck a chord with the proletariat and peasants who had long suffered under the Tsarist rule. However, these promises often masked the harsh reality of Bolshevik policies, including forced collectivization and state-controlled economies. The Russian Revolution did not occur in isolation. It was closely watched by other nations, many of whom had vested interests in its outcome. Western powers such as Britain, France, and the United States were deeply concerned about the spread of communism and provided support to the White Army during the Russian Civil War. These interventions, however, were often half-hearted and poorly coordinated, contributing to the eventual victory of the Bolsheviks. Meanwhile, socialist movements in Europe and Asia drew inspiration from the revolution, viewing it as a blueprint for overthrowing oppressive regimes in their own countries. The Russian Revolution's influence extended far beyond its borders, reshaping the global political landscape. The establishment of the Soviet Union marked the beginning of a bipolar world, with capitalism and communism vying for dominance. This ideological divide played out in various ways, from the Cold War to decolonization movements in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The revolution also inspired a wave of labor movements and socialist parties worldwide, many of which sought to emulate the Bolshevik model. However, the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 highlighted the limitations and challenges of implementing revolutionary ideals on a large scale. The legacy of the Russian Revolution is complex and sophisticated. On one hand, it inspired countless movements for social and economic justice around the world. On the other hand, it led to the establishment of an authoritarian regime that stifled political freedoms and perpetuated cycles of violence and repression. The revolution's ideals of equality and workers' rights continue to resonate, but its implementation serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of concentrated powers and the challenges of societal transformation.
In conclusion, the Russian Revolution was driven by the widespread violation of the people's rights, prompting the citizens to revolt against the oppressive Tsarist regime. While their desire for change was justified, the new leadership under the Bolsheviks proved to be just as corrupt. Continuing this cycle of ignored rights, this set the stage for future conflicts, including the Cold War, which, in the eyes of many Russians, was seen as an inevitable consequence of their struggle. This unification of the Russian people under communism was born by the devastation and suffering caused by the Tsar, which left deep scars on both the nation and its economy.
Thank you to our most important sources. These include the Marxist Academic Library, Getty Images, and Alpha History. Thank you for watching.